This week, the shiur, the food, everything is sponsored. Liuli Neshama, Bechor Ben Lisa. So this week's parasha, Lech Lecha. If you haven't been following along in the Torah, it's kedai to start looking in the parasha. The parasha is loaded, overloaded with crazy ideas. Intense Torah, topics you could spend way more than one parasha, 1 week on. One of the ideas seems to be a little puzzling. It says that we know that there's not a single letter in the Torah that doesn't belong. Every single letter in the Torah is so important. If one of them is missing, the whole Torah is pasul. We can't read the whole Torah. Even a little bit of a yud. If it's missing, it's not there. So we know that every single letter there is of extreme value. So we look in this week's parasha and we see something a little puzzling. The Torah tells us, it starts building up a story. Once there were 4 kings. They were really big and they had these huge followings. And there were also 5 kings. And these 4 kings and these 5 kings, they didn't get along. And the Torah is telling us who they were and where they were the king of and how long they ruled for and who was in charge of the 4 and who was in charge of the 5. And the Torah is building up this whole story just to tell us that they waged war against each other. It was a huge fight. The 4 kings and their armies, the 5 kings and their armies, and they go at it. And the Torah says, ultimately, the 4 kings win. And that whole build-up is just to tell me, Avraham Avinu then goes and fights these 4 kings. But we have to know that these 4 kings are so powerful, they beat the 5 kings. And Avraham Avinu goes, and he takes on these 4 kings, these superpower 4 kings. And Avraham Avinu beats them. So what's the Torah telling us? Who cares? Even if you didn't tell me the 4 kings were more powerful than the 5 kings, you tell me Avraham Avinu goes, and he takes on 4 kings. And it wasn't just 4 kings. It wasn't like a 4-on-1. It was 4 kings and their entire armies. Versus Avraham Avinu. And the Torah tells us that Avraham Avinu had 318 men. And even that's a machloket. But some people say it wasn't 318 men. It was Avraham and one other person. Eliezer. The gematria of Eliezer is 318. It was Avraham and Eliezer, a tag team, versus 4 armies and their kings. And Avraham Avinu beats them. Why do I care that the 4 took on the 5? Seems extra. We said there's no word in the Torah, there's no letter in the Torah that's extra. Here it's telling us a lot of extra information. Why do we need to know this? Says the Divrei Yisrael from Majlis. This is a hint to something else. Yes, Abraham took on the 4 kings and the 4 kings beat the 5 kings. That all happened. But it's telling us something that we need to know right now and today, in our times. Each and every one of us has 4 different elements that make us up. Each one of us has a different amount. There's Eish, which is fire. There's Afar, which is dirt. There's Mayim, which is water. And there's Ruach, which is wind. And these 4 things, right? The fire, earth, water, and wind, the different amounts, they correspond to different characteristics. And each one of us has a different level of this and that and the other. And it makes up who we are and our personality traits. But these 4 are our physical components. There are also, on a spiritual level, 5 different aspects, 5 different parts of who we are. There's Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, Yechidah. Okay? What each one of them is and does, whatever, it's not for now. So within us, we have 4 components of physicality, 5 components of spirituality. And the 4 kings and the 5 kings within ourselves are always going to fight. They're always going to war. And sometimes, unfortunately, hopefully not so often, the 4 kings beat out the 5 kings. Means the physical component of who we are, our ta'aba, our desires, overcome our kedusha, our spirituality, our ratzon to be closer to Hashem. And so the 4 kings beat the 5 kings. We know what we want to do, but sometimes it's hard to connect to Hashem. So comes the Torah and tells us, to build up this whole scenario to tell us like this. That even when the 4 kings beat the 5 kings, even when our physical being overcomes our spiritual being, we feel like we're done. That's it. I have no more. I'm losing. Comes the Torah and says, you know what Avraham Avinu does? He takes on the 4 kings anyways. Avraham Avinu goes and says, even though the 4 kings are so much more powerful, they beat out the 5 kings, I still know that I can take them on. Which is how beautiful is this? You might think that, I didn't know they were. I messed up. I can't do this, I can't do that. It's too hard for me. I'm miyayesh, I give up. I can't do this anymore. We said the Torah says that Avraham and 318 men were with him. 318 is also 1 more than Yush. If you take the word Yush, that's 317. 1 more is 318. When we're miyayesh, we give up. I can't, it's not possible, it's beyond me, I'm not strong enough, I'm not big enough, I'm not holy enough. That's Yush. Avraham Avinu went to take on the 5 kings with 1 more than Yush, meaning he overcame this idea of I can't. He said, I can. That's the same milchama, that's the same fight, that's the same battle that we fight every single time. You can think, I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to make a bracha every day. I'm going to try to put on my tefillin every day. I'm going to try not to speak lashon hara every day. And I mess up. The Yetzer Hara beat me up. Okay, that's it, I'm done. Game over. Comes Avraham Avinu and says, no, what do you mean? Even if that's the case, you lost the 4 kings, your physical being, your tava, your desires, your wants overcame your spiritual being. Avraham Avinu says, still go at it. That's not an excuse. You have the ability to overcome those 4 kings still. You're not allowed to be miyayesh. You can't give up hope. And Avraham Avinu goes and he takes on the 4 kings, and he's matzliach. He wins. How much greater is Avraham now? If he would have given up, okay, he gave up. He didn't even fight them. Avraham Avinu and his 318 men, Eliezer or the Yush, overcame the 4. Now, who's not afraid of Avraham? The Yetzer Hara himself will be afraid of Avraham. And you know what happens? When Avraham Avinu, how did he beat them? So the Gemara tells us it's very simple. Avraham Avinu didn't do a single thing. All he did was say, I'm going to fight. What happens is Hashem made a nes, Hashem made a miracle. How's Avraham, realistically, how's 1 or 319 men, let's say, going to take on 4 armies of men? It doesn't work. The man, I don't care how good of a warrior you are. So we know, what did Avraham Avinu do? He bends down, he picks up the sand, and he literally throws sand in the direction of the 4 armies. Hashem made a nes that each grain of sand he threw turned into an arrow and starts piercing them. They're sitting there shooting bows and arrows. Avram's literally throwing sand. And the sand turns into arrows, and that's how he defeats them. They ran away. That's what happened. That shows Abraham was so great. Hashem made a nes. What did he do? The answer is very simple. He didn't give up. That's all you need to do, is just not to give up. I saw a beautiful thing. I saw it this morning. It was amazing. I never saw this idea. A lot of times you see people send out the same pictures, the same ideas, the nice little quotes over and over again. I saw one today I never saw before. When you ask how is spelled H-O-W. I know a lot of you have been a while since you're in school. How is H-O-W? He says, remember, Hashem opens windows. That's what how stands for. When you don't know, how am I going to do this? How am I going to beat the Yetzer Hara? Nobody asked you to answer. Hashem opens windows. Your job is to just keep going. Lo alacha hamlacha l'gemar, v'lo ata b'chorin nivatam minha. You don't need to finish the job. You don't need to figure out, well, if I don't know how to do this, I can't do that. You know what? It's not worth it. Our job is just to keep moving forward. Avraham Avinu could have said, okay, 4 beat the 5. I'm way too intimidated by them. He says, no, I'm going to go get them anyways. How do you beat them? He didn't care. Hashem is going to take care of it. And that's why with the same grain of sand, those same sand, we know there's a famous story of Nachum Ish Gamzu. Gamzu L'Tova, you've heard that phrase? Nachum Ish Gamzu perfected it. That's why they called him, literally, Nachum Ish Gamzu, because he perfected this idea, Gamzu L'Tova. Everything is for the best, whatever happens. And we know the famous story. There was a king, and the Jewish community had to go send the king a present. And they decided, who are they going to send? We're going to send Nachum Ish Gamzu to the king in case something goes wrong. Nachum Ish Gamzu L'Tova, everything will be good with him. And he goes, and they send, what are they going to send? What do you send the king? So they took a briefcase, and they loaded it up with diamonds and gems and jewelry. They were giving it to the king for free. And what happens? They just go, and Nachum goes, and he has to stop by an inn. So he stops by the inn, and before he goes to bed, he opens up the briefcase, makes sure everything's good. He slips it under his bed, and he goes to sleep. But some people saw him come to the inn, and they knew who he was, they knew what was going on. And while he was sleeping, they swapped his suitcase. It's like a classic scene in a movie, right? They walk in with the same identical briefcase, they swap out the suitcase. What they put instead, they took the diamonds and gems, and they left him with sand. They filled it with dirt and sand and garbage, and he put it under his bed. He wakes up in the morning, he opens up to check, and he sees the diamonds are gone, the gems are gone, the jewelry is gone, it's just a bunch of dirt, sand, filth. He looks up to Hashem and says, Gamzu L'Tova. Closes it, clicks the briefcase closed, and goes off to the king. Now they're lining up. And this town gives their prize, and this town gives their present, and that present. And Nachum Ish Gamzu comes, and he hands his briefcase to the messenger. He brings it up to the king. The king opens up the briefcase. The king goes, are you crazy? This is what the Jewish community sent me? A suitcase full of dirt? What kind of insult is this? As the king is about to get crazy, angry, and kill him, Eliyahu Hanavi is standing on the side, dressed up as a servant of the king. Says, wait, Your Honor, Your Majesty, perhaps this is some of that special sand that they have. He says, what are you talking about? He goes, from the story of Avraham Avinu, he had special sand. Maybe this is that sand. He says, okay, let's test it. And they bring out a bullseye, they bring out a target, and they pick up a grain of sand, they pick up one, and they throw it, and wow, voila, it turns into an arrow. What? It's recorded. The Gemara tells us the story. Nachum Ish Gamzu is the same midah, the same idea as Avraham Avinu. Don't worry what's going to be, how am I going to be, when am I going to be, who am I going to be. Just do. Avraham Avinu didn't care there were 4 kings, there were 5 kings. If you didn't that, he destroyed 9 kings, right? You always know that when you follow sports, right? If your team beats the other team, he beat every team that they beat. It's as if they would have beaten them. So yeah, Avraham Avinu took on 9 different kings. He was stronger than them. Did he worry about how am I going to beat them? What's my plan? He said, I'm going to do what Hashem wants me to do. I'm going to take them on. How? Hashem opens windows. I don't need to worry about it. My job is just to go and do what I have to do. I lost the war? Just forget it and win the next one. That's the avodah of Avraham Avinu. And it relates back to the beginning of the parasha. The beginning of the parasha is a beautiful idea. I'm sure you all heard this idea, but it's worth repeating it. Lech lecha. Literally, it means go lecha, to yourself. What does it mean, go to yourself? We each need to be sure that we're being the best we could be. Go fulfill that purpose of who you are. Each one of us is here for a different reason. When we slack, when we don't try, when we throw in the towel, you're not being the person you're supposed to be. Lech lecha, just keep going, keep moving, keep going forward. Don't worry about all the other things. I fell, I stumbled, I tripped. Get up and go again. That's the avodah of Avraham Avinu. Just don't worry. Just keep moving, keep moving, keep moving. That's the only reason that the 10 nishonot of Avraham Avinu. How? So just keep moving forward. Whatever happened, happened. We're going to be the best I could be in each and every situation. We do like that, so we don't have to worry about the 4 kings or the 5 kings, or I failed this time, or I did good that time. Supposed to, I could have. Today, right now, every second is a brand new opportunity for us. My bracha to all of us is that we realize that we have that ability. Avraham Avinu instilled in us a spiritual DNA to do the same exact thing that he did. To overcome that same amount, that same level of Yetzer Hara within ourselves, we can overcome it. So even if you feel like you're down and you want to be miyayish and it's too difficult and you want to give up, just think back. You are stronger than you realize. You can overcome the 4, you can overcome the 5, you can overcome all 9. If they were facing Avraham, you'd take on all 9. And brachas, you realize how strong you are, and you have the ability to do the same exact avodah that Avraham Avinu had.